Welcome back, everyone. For today's video, we are going to be taking a look at the first edition of Freestyle Friday. Now, Freestyle Friday is an idea that I pitched to chess.com a couple of months ago, and chess.com reached out to the people who are organizing the Freestyle Grand Slam Tour, and they decided to sponsor this new event. So what exactly is Freestyle Friday? Freestyle Friday is effectively like Title Tuesday. It is a tournament with 11 rounds played with a time control of 3+1. But as you can tell from the board on the screen, the players start out with the pieces being randomized on the back rank. Now, it's called freestyle. Of course, many of you know this as Chess 960, Chess 9LX, Fisher Random. Basically, you organize the piece on the back rank with different assortments. So, all the top dogs were choosing to play in this event, including the 5-time world champion, Magnus Carlsen, yours truly, Hans Niemann, Fabiano Caruana, and many, many more. So let's get right into the action. We're going to pick it up in the 8th round with Magnus and Hans, or going to the 8th round with Magnus and Hans, both on 7 points out of 7. So players are leading the event. Magnus had just come off a very big win against me, a very chaotic game, which could have gone either way, but he did end up on top. So in the 8th round, we have one of the El Clasico matchups with Rage and Hans playing against Magnus Carlsen. Hans has the white pieces in this game, and the game starts out with the move d4. Now, this is a move that I don't necessarily hate, but one of the things when you're playing Fisher Random Chess is you have to be very careful of the bishops on the diagonals, because when white goes d4 here, white is slamming the door shut potentially, or black has an open diagonal versus his bishop on a1. So we get d4. Now we get d5 being played. Hans plays the move g3. We get g6. And now we have the move b3. Magnus decides here to lash out with the move c5. And already you can tell that this is a slight mistake. Computer does not like this move. It's not bad or anything, but it is a very forcing move. Now, of course, Magnus could have played b6 and we would have had the classic mirror, mirror on the wall. Who's the fairest of them all? But instead he plays c5. Now we get the move c4 from Hans, and this is already a huge mistake from Hans on move 4. Now, Hans likes to tout himself as being the future first American world champion, but with blunders on move number 4 like this, it's very hard to see Hans achieving that goal. So Hans outright makes a huge blunder on move number 4. How embarrassing. We get pawn takes pawn, Hans plays queen takes, and already here after the move knight to e6, black is winning this pawn on d4 here due to the pin on the diagonal, and it's already a big disaster. Now, on a separate note, this is also why Fisher Random Chess can be considered very, very interesting and different, because there is no opening preparation, no theory whatsoever. And because of that, you're on your own for move number 1. You must use this thing that we call a brain, and you can't simply use this new age hippie technology to basically survive the first 15 moves without having to think at all. So after knight to e6, we get the move bishop to d5 here from Hans, and Magnus decides to sack the rook with rook takes bishop on d5. Now, the computer actually prefers black choosing the castle here, but Magnus is in no mood to do this. He's obviously a big fan of Levy. He knows that he's playing as Levy's coach here, and he decides to sack the rook. So we get queen takes rook. Magnus decides to castle, and now we get the move knight d2. Now, already here it's very hard to play. If this were a classical game with more time, there's some chance that Hans could come up with a better solution. But when you're playing 3+1, you don't want to fall too far behind on the clock. And the fact that white is going to lose the pawn, there's b6 or b5 to open up the diagonal to attack the queen, makes this simply very, very difficult. So we get knight to d2, and now Magnus plays the move knight c6. Now, you might be thinking, why not b5? The queen is simply trapped here. But you do have to be very careful, because if you play a move like b5 trapping the queen, you actually end up just hanging the bishop on a8, and after this, you end up resigning the game. So Magnus goes knight to c6, developing the knight. He intends to open up the scope for the bishop, and now Hans plays the move queen c4. Now, white could play the move pawn takes pawn, but this would actually lose the bishop on a1, and you would lose the game very, very quickly. So we get the move knight takes d4, Hans takes on d4, Magnus takes with the knight, and now we get the move knight a3 being played. Here Magnus plays the move b6, and at this point this is a lovely position for Magnus. He has the two bishops, or the Bs as we call them, the bishop pair here. White also is lacking. There's no fianchetto bishop on g2. So if you ever try to castle kingside, very, very quickly after queen to h3, you're getting attacked immediately. So we get the move knight to b5. Magnus plays the move knight takes knight, we get queen takes knight, and here we have the move queen h3 being played to stop white from ever castling the king to g1. Hans plays the move queen d3. We get queen takes pawn, rook f1, and now we have the move queen h3. Now here, Hans could have tried to castle the king out of the center of the board. The rook on d1 has not moved, so queenside castles is a possibility. I'm not sure whether Hans didn't realize it existed or he just didn't like it. However, after castles, black would probably play something like queen e6, and now you have the problem that I'm going to use the queen and the bishop and attack you with a double A battery on this diagonal. And much like the other diagonal, once again, you're lacking. You don't have your fianchettoed bishop. There's no bishop on b2 to support the king. So with these two pawn structures, both of the diagonals are open for the bishops, and Magnus is on the hunt. So we get the move knight to f3. Now we have the move bishop to c6 being played by Magnus. Here we have rook g1 from Hans. Magnus goes queen e6, king f1, and now we get to move bishop f6. Now what Magnus wants to do here is he has a bishop and 2 pawns for the rook. He needs to start creating weaknesses in the white camp. You have ideas like queen h3, you have b5, you have g5, and therefore we get to move king g2, and now Magnus goes g5 with the idea of g4. Hans plays king f1 back, and now we get the move check, king e1, queen e6, king f1, and now Magnus plays king g7. Here we get g4 being played, and we have the move h6. Magnus simply improving the position. The pawn on h6 guards the pawn on g5 here. You're always spying the pawn on g4, but additionally, you're just trying to improve the position, keep the game going. Slowly but surely you want to improve, but this is not the time to be hasty, as you have all the time in the world. We get the move queen c4. Magnus trades the queens, and now he goes a6, and at this point it's a very easy position to play for black. This might not be completely precise according to the computer, but when you're playing blitz, you want easy moves, and this is simply cruise control for Magnus. He's going to go b5. For example, say you get something like this, you can always go c4 c3. If white ignores it, you can go b4 a5 a4 b3. So at this point, Magnus's position is very easy to play. He wants to push the c pawn or push the a and b pawns to create a passed pawn. Now we get the move king g2. Magnus plays b5. We get pawn takes, pawn takes, king g3, and now we have the move rook a8 to attack the pawn on a2. Here Hans plays rook d2. Magnus goes c4 with the idea of pushing his p. He wants to go c3 and b4. We get e3, c3, rook to e2, and now we have the move b4 from Magnus. Here Hans plays the move rook b1. We get bishop to b5, and now we have the move rook e to e1. Magnus plays rook to a4, guarding the pawn here. Again, no need to rush anything here. You don't need to go c2. You don't have to go rook a2. You have all the time in the world to improve the position. So you get rook a4. Hans plays e4, and now Magnus plays the move c2. We get rook c1, and now a very important moment. Rook takes a2 would still be winning after e5 and b3 because Magnus can keep pushing his p. But you can also play the move bishop c3, which is what Magnus does, attacking the rook, avoiding any of these ideas with e5 to trap the bishop on f6, and now it is GG, why not? We got rook takes pawn, bishop d3. Also, by the way, bishop takes e1 would be good enough. Bishop d3, takes. We get the move rook e3, and now Magnus plays c2, trying to make a queen. We get rook to e1. Magnus plays bishop takes e4. We get knight d2, bishop g6, and here we have the move knight b3. Magnus plays rook a2, knight c1, and now we get to move rook a1. Here f3 is played. Magnus goes e6. Now I think if this were a normal situation, Hans would have already resigned the game, but very recently when Magnus played in Title Tuesday, he actually got flagged 3 times because Magnus cannot afford good internet in Norway. And so I think for that reason, based off of the recent result in Title Tuesday, Hans simply wants to keep playing because he's hoping that Magnus's $5 dial-up internet simply is going to fail him once again. So we get the move king to f2. Magnus plays h5. We get takes, king e3, and now the move rook a3 is played. We have king d2 from Hans. Magnus plays rook takes f3. We get king takes c2, and now we have the move g4. Now here, as you can tell, Magnus has 3 extra pawns. He's pushing his p, and the rest is very, very clinical. We get king d2, g3, knight d3, f6 is played to cut off the knight jump to e5. We have rook g1, and now Magnus plays the move bishop g6. We get knight to e1, rook a3, knight g2, and here Magnus plays move e5. This move is not a mistake, but the only reason that I don't love this move is that once Hans is able to play knight e3, now we're in a situation where both players have 8 seconds, and black is going to lose this pawn. But true to form, we don't consider Magnus to be the greatest player of all time for nothing, and he uses 7 seconds before or 6 seconds I should say before playing this move g2, but it is one of the cleanest and most efficient ways to win here, because if white takes with the rook after check, you simply trade the rooks. You go bishop e4, knight e3, and f5, and with the 2 connected pawns, Magnus is going to push his p and Hans is going to resign. Instead, Hans plays the move knight takes g2, and now after the move rook to g3, the knight on g2 is pinned here. Hans plays king e2, we get bishop to e4, and in this position, the future first American world champion, Hans Niemann, resigns the game because if he moves the knight, he loses the rook, and if you go king to f2, black trades everything down here, and once again, 2 is worth a lot more than 0. So after bishop to e4, Magnus gets a big win. He moves to a perfect score with 8 points out of 8, and he is on cruise control. Now, Magnus would go on to win this event with a score of 9.5 out of 11. He would suffer a tough loss in the final round to Alexander Bornik, who would come in second. But now we're going to take a look at one of my games, which I played in the final round of the event, the 11th round, where I'm playing with the white pieces against the famous Vietnamese Grandmaster, for a long time, someone we consider to be the strongest IM in the world, Minh Le Tuan, also known as Wonderful Time. So, Fischer random, all the pieces are assembled on random squares here, and I open with the move c4. Now, when you play Fischer random chess, the first thing that you always want to look out for is anything hanging? Remember, the original devs, they came up with these great piece setups with the king, the queen, the bishop, the knight, and the rook 1,500 years ago. They probably were studying this all those many years ago, maybe 1,500, 2,000 years ago, whenever the devs were creating chess. We can have a separate historical discussion about that. But the devs, they organized the pieces for a reason. And they understood that if you put the pieces on all these random squares, sometimes everything is not protected. And that's just not how you think chess should be played. But in the new age, of course, as I said with Fischer random, you want to pay attention. And so when I go c4 here, I'm attacking the pawn on h7. So say black plays a move like a6, or let's just say e5 because it's a standard central move. It looks like an English, but because the pieces aren't on their usual squares, after bishop takes h7, it's already spaghetti-o. Your rook is trapped. You're going to lose the rook. And on move number 2, you've lost the game. Like, you've blundered on move number 1 and you resign. So Minh Le here decides to castle his king to guard the pawn. And it's interesting because during this event, in one of the earlier rounds, there was a position where the pawn was also hanging on h7, and people were screaming at me saying you could have just castled on move 1. Now, in response to that comment, I said that I felt that based on my intuition that castling on move 1 is a mistake because your opponent does not have to castle to the same side. Your opponent can try to castle the other way. You've made your decision clear by castling your king, and now your opponent has options. So as soon as Minh Le castled on move 1, I realized that because I had said this, well, now I have to prove the point. I cannot simply just castle my king, play some boring game. I said it on stream. I'm a man of my word. I better try to prove why castling on move 1 is such a big mistake. So after castles, I play this move g4 here. Now you'll notice that I have the rook on g1 on this g file aiming towards the king. I also have these two b's which are aiming on the long diagonals. And already here, the computer doesn't like my position. It says g4 is a big mistake. If I were to castle, this position is plus 0.7 for white, but after g4, it's minus 0.4. So once again, another thing with Fischer random is you're going to see a lot of mistakes from humans. We cannot play anywhere near the level we do in regular chess simply because there is no opening theory and we effectively can't memorize anything. So after g4, we got to move c5, and now we have to move knight to g3 here for me. Basically, I don't want to hang the pawn on h2, but also I'm trying to play in the spirit of one of the goats of all time, Gary Chess, who said that a knight on f5 is worth at least a pawn. So here we get bishop e5 from Minh Le. Now I play the move e3. What Minh Le is trying to do here with bishop e5 is dominate my bishop on this diagonal. I can't go b3 here. Say you get this position, you'll notice that now both the diagonals are open. My b's are doing really well. But when he goes bishop e5, he wants to try and stop me from opening up this diagonal while building a temporary wooden shield in the middle of the board. So I play the move e3. My idea here is, say black goes b6. I'm going to play f4. If he goes to f6 after g5, you'll notice that this bishop is simply trapped on the diagonal. It's going to be captured. You're going to have to give up the bishop, and you are just toast. You're finished. So in this position after e3 with the idea of f4, here Minh Le plays the move bishop takes knight. And this is a move that I didn't like. Honestly, it's a very hard position to play. The move that I probably would have played if I were playing with black is this move g6, because after f4 and bishop g7, I did not see an instant way to win. I don't know what I would have done if this had occurred in the game, but there are ideas like knight to h5 and takes with the open g file and queen c2. There's even knight f5 potentially. I can go queen c2 here, followed by a knight h5, and it just looks very dangerous for black to play this position. So Minh Le decides he's having none of this. He doesn't want to play g6, create some weaknesses, have this bad knight that can't get into the game, and he trades the bishop for the knight. I take back with the rook here, we get b6, and now I play the move queen c2, lining up the double A battery to try and checkmate the king on h7. Min-Lay plays knight g6, and now I play the move h4, and at this point, everything has gone wrong for Min-Lay. The idea is simply to play h5, so we get e6 and h5, for example. The knight is under attack. If you move the knight anywhere, I take the pawn. We create the classic checkmate here, so you can't move the knight, and if you're going to give up the knight, you may as well resign. So Min-Lay decides to play the move f5 here, trying to break up the AA battery. But now after pawn takes and knight takes h4, I have the move b3, opening up this diagonal for the bishop and the rook. With a AA battery, the queen and the bishop on this diagonal, the rook and the bishop hitting the king on this diagonal, and the open G file here. This is just a complete disaster. And Min-Lay, who is a strong grandmaster, make no mistake about it, is simply lost after 9 moves. Now in regular chess, Min-Lay or Bortnick or Magnus or myself, none of us could ever lose a game in 9 moves. But maybe if you're Ivanchuk, it's possible. I think he did lose 1 in 9 moves. But the point remains that strong grandmasters simply will not lose the games as quickly, because due to opening theory, you never get in so much trouble so quickly. So after b3, we get the move rook to f7 from Min-Lay to guard the pawn on g7, and now I play the move king e2. Now this of course is me memeing a little bit. I go for Le Bon Cloud, moving the king to the center, but there's also another very serious idea behind this move, which is I want to line up the double stack on the g file. If I can line up the double stack with this bishop on a1, this is just an absolute dream. You'll notice that other than the knight on d1, every other piece is optimally placed. Bishop's on the diagonal, rook hits the pawn, rook's going to g1 to stack, queen and bishop are on this diagonal. So other than this lone knight, every other piece in this position is on the perfect square, and I have achieved perfect harmony. So Min-Lay plays queen c6, I go rook to g1 with a double stack hitting the pawn, and now Min-Lay plays move knight takes f5. Now what's amazing about this is that the computer still thinks after this awkward looking move queen to h6, black is kind of in the game, because I were to take the pawn here. After check, king f1, now there's some knight takes f5, and even though I have all kinds of fossils and discoveries with the bishop, with the rook hanging and the pressure on the f file, apparently black is winning. But for a mere human like myself, Min-Lay or Magnus, this is just not an obvious move, and so Min-Lay decides to play the move knight takes pawn on f5. Now after knight takes f5, this allows me to get a photo finish here. I sack the rook with rook takes pawn on g7. Min-Lay takes back with the rook here. If he were to play knight takes rook, I have takes with the queen and the bishop guarding each other here. And after king f8, queen to h8 is simply checkmate, as it's an ice skater. The king is stuck in the box. So you get the move rook takes rook. Now I take again, sacking a second rook, and here Min-Lay decides to resign the game. If he moves the king, let's just say to h8, after queen takes f5, I'm up a piece, I've got this diagonal, I'm mating him with the bishop and the queen as well. It's all but hopeless, and if Min-Lay plays move knight takes rook, accepting the rook gambit, I take this pawn with the queen and the bishop guarding each other. He goes king f7, I take, and after king to e6, I have the move queen g6, and just like that, the black king on e6 gets checkmated. There are no squares available due to the b's in conjunction with the queen. So this was a really, really nice win in the final round. This got me to a score of 9 out of 11, and I would take 3rd place home on tiebreaks behind Magnus and Bortnick, as I mentioned before. But a really, really pleasant and fun game to play. I think this recap highlights why so many people are actually fans of Fischer Random Chess, because without the theory, you get to see that grandmasters, we might play all these fancy schmancy moves, all this memorization, all this theory, but when it comes down to it, if we have to play with our own brain, we're actually not as good as we pretend to be at the game of chess. And so you have to use your brain, you have to be original and creative, and I think a lot of people enjoy it, and I enjoy this. You're never going to see people blundering on move 2 or 3 in a normal game, but in Fischer Random, anything is possible. So I really did enjoy this event. I take home $100 in 3rd place. I would also like to point out it's the first edition of this tournament, but it was a smashing success with nearly 500 players competing, very similar to Title Tuesday. So all in all, a lot of fun. So I hope you guys enjoy this recap. I hope you guys take up Fischer Random if you haven't already. And on that note, I hope you guys enjoyed the recap. And if you're not already subscribed to the channel, make sure that you smash that subscribe button below, and we'll be back with some more great recaps and content in the coming days. Hope you enjoyed it, and have a great rest of your day. See you. Bye.